Hey everyone, if you aren't aware, this is part of a series where I go over every Titans comic, adaptation, and direct spin-off. I have links in the video description, in that little top corner thing, and in the comments below if I'm smart enough to put it there. So be sure to check that out and subscribe if you're interested in learning more about the Teen Titans. With that, let's zero in on Teen Titans Volume 2, a totally new take on the team with a roster almost completely full of new characters. Written by DC legend Dan Jurgens, best known for stuff like The Death of Superman and creating tons of memorable characters from the fallout of it. So we aren't exactly dealing with an incompetent writer here. I also like a lot of the art in these books because Jurgens himself penciled them while George Perez inked the first 15 issues. So this is an insanely prestigious way to reimagine the Titans, with one of the best working on the art. I was so excited to explore this series I'd only really encountered in passing before. Sure, it comes across as a bit weird right from the outset. We have an entirely new team, as stated, consisting of Adam, turned into a teenager thanks to some comic book shenanigans at a 0 hour, and new characters Prysm, Joto, Wrist, and Argent. With George Perez enhancing a lot of these panels, we get a lot of really cool visuals as we are introduced to these new characters, but almost immediately something feels off in the writing. Joto and Risk really don't feel all that interesting as characters. I can't really tell you much about them, their powers being kind of bland, their dialogue being very boring, and their personalities coming across as very generic to me. Adam, completely away from any character he might have history with for the first chunk of the series, feels very out of his element, put in a position I don't think fits with him very well, and he doesn't even seem to get all that close or personable with the team. The only one who does stand out a little bit is Argent. I like her quite a bit, and coupled with the visuals and occasionally interesting settings in this series, she alone kind of saves Teen Titans Volume 2 from being a total waste. Visually, she's pretty interesting and feels like she has a lot more going on with her than the others. I don't think it's a coincidence she's the only one that's going to turn up again in a major presence in another era of Titans history. I also don't hate Prysm. She, like Argent, is at least visually interesting, and that goes even more so for her introduction. She grew up having been raised by aliens in this tank, living in some alternate reality where everything looked black and white. Her rescue by the Titans, gradually using color to denote her freedom from this virtual reality and this world being destroyed around her, that was all very cool to me. However, that issue, the second one of the series, is also a good example of where this iteration of Titans goes a little wrong. Visually, it is cool, but the story is a bit of a mess. All that is happening is the Atom is rescuing the other Teen Titans who have all been captured by the same beings that had secretly raised Prysm. Yet I find the art, as interesting as it can be, made that initial rescue attempt a little hard to follow in the action, and a little too dynamic to really give me a sense of what was going on. I look at a page like this, and Adam doesn't seem to be in any sort of legitimate sense of danger like I think he should be. Then he starts freeing people, including Risk. Now look at Risk here. He's been abducted, he's in this new and weird situation, he's just discovered he's actually half alien and has all these new powers. This should be a very big moment for the character. It's up to Dan Jurgens to sell us on the idea that this is a superhero we should care about and be invested in for this series. After all, he's brand new as a character. And what does Risk do? Well, he gets mad. He kicks one alien robot thing and smashes it to bits. He shows this brief moment of understandable anger, and that's it. That's all the reaction we really get out of this moment. I'm not against the idea of a new team and new characters after such a long run with Marv Wolfman in the last 5 rounds of Teen Titans, but this is pretty awful. Way worse than anything, even as the Wolfman era really started to drag on. Dan Jurgens never really gives us a reason to care about these characters. They're all so boring. Unlike in a normal superhero team, even let's say a normal Titan superhero team, where everyone has their own little history to them, associated with a specific domain of DC that can be explored along the way, everyone but Ray Palmer is the exact same alien hybrid. They all get their powers from this first adventure, and it leaves them largely disassociated with any stories that might follow because of it, unless it specifically has to do with these types of aliens. Even looking at someone like Prysm, who should really be more interesting than she ever really was in these comics. So this becomes one of the more generic and boring Titan series I've encountered. Were it not for the artwork being pretty cool and character design here and there, especially once more of the legacy content starts to chop up, I really struggle to find value with these comics. You can tell how much of a problem it all was once you have the mainstay Titans characters showing up, like Nightwing and Arsenal after a little while. The second these established characters appear, suddenly this volume of Teen Titans surges with life, this energy that simply didn't exist before. Dan Jurgens has always been pretty good at writing well-known characters and concepts, like Nightwing or Superman, and having consistently done so over the course of many decades now. I did make some attempts to figure out what was actually going on with these comics, if it was solely the result of Dan Jurgens not really being able to pull off a team like this at the time, or if it was more DC intervening and forcing the situation on some level. Scrapping a beloved superhero team in favor of building one up from the ground up is not an easy feat, and I'm not sure whether DC or Jurgens would want it that way. I actually went down a bit of a rabbit hole to learn more, and the best I can tell you is it's probably a combination of different factors. What I did find and learn paints a picture of a difficult editorial climate when this book was first being published. After Wolfman had been writing the Teen Titans for so long, it seems as though the company felt new energy was indeed needed for the franchise. I doubt they went so far as to tell Jurgens that he had to use a teenaged Atom accompanied by some of the most boring superheroes I've ever encountered though. Yet at the same time, I don't think DC was playing nice about what characters were allowed to be used by Jurgens in general. This is best illustrated when DC put out a fan poll asking what superhero should join this team. Tim Drake actually won, which would have been interesting, but the Batman wing of the publication company threw a fit, insisting they maintain control over Robin. So instead, Captain Marvel Jr. joins. It's really not all that impressive, to be honest, and within 2 years of it premiering, Teen Titans was once again cancelled, with little closure ever given to most of these new characters, or any of the dangling plot threads going on, like the whole thing of Atom. Atom really could just be Robin or Nightwing or anyone in these stories, and he would basically fulfill the same role time and time again. Could have been interesting to have a more experienced superhero youngified and leading these newbies, but that dynamic feels like it was severely underused in these comics. And yes, while those familiar with the history of the comic book industry in the late 90s know this was a tough time when a lot of books got cancelled in general for any reason, in this case it feels like that cancellation was pretty firmly deserved. It has to do with something that really bothers me about this era of Teen Titans. I'm actively looking at these books as I write this script, and I'm really having trouble finding any standout moments, cool villains, or anything else here that really makes these comics exceptional. Now that I'm doing the recording, it's even harder to think of those moments. George Perez returning to do art is, or at least should be, something, and it shows on some level DC was serious about making this new team a hit. But even Perez can only do so much inking content this mediocre and boring. I love the artist, but it really isn't the best example of Perez's work, probably because Jurgens was really taking the lead in the artwork department too. There's something about the facial expressions here that come across a lot more lifeless than when George was actually doing the penciling. So these comics ultimately just don't have the same heart in them like the older Teen Titans books once had. This might seem low or maybe a little high given this negative review, but it is still a far cry away from the D grades we will be talking about eventually, let alone the two eras I feel deserve an F. While it is pretty surprising given how critical I am of these comics, they really are just slightly more competently made than a lot of other bad Teen Titans eras. Whereas stuff in the future is a nightmare of poor decisions and bad stories, this iteration of Teen Titans is more like a bad series made by a very talented writer and artist. So yes, Dan Jurgens and George Perez didn't really do a great job, and it is going to a level of quality not seen since the team first premiered in the 1960s. But these two didn't really totally screw up either. I don't particularly like these new characters much, but they were never unbearable. You also have Argent, who I do like, and therefore this era of Teen Titans does have some value. And when we are doing more classically oriented Titan stuff with Nightwing or other characters when they do show up, the series isn't halfway bad. It's just a shame because those moments are relatively rare, yet there's just enough of it to like and put off the D grade, even if it is only barely so. So overall, I don't think I would like or would recommend Teen Titans Volume 2, but it is far from the worst thing I've experienced as we go through this franchise history. Next up, Devin Grayson takes over the series, bringing the Titans back and hopefully taking this series back to something a little more glorious. So make sure you subscribe to Comic Island and hit that bell so you can be notified when that episode comes out. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.